Aloha mai kako. Mahalo for joining us today. In a moment, we will hear from Maui County Department of Fire and Public Safety Chief Brad Ventura, Assistant Chief Jeffrey Giese, and Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Seattle Field Division Special Agent in Charge, Jonathan Blaze. Also in attendance as a resource, we are joined by ATF Branch Chief and Certified Fire Investigator, Walter Shaw. Today, we will be providing an update on the origin and cause report for the August 8th, 2023 wildfire. Facilitated questions and answers will follow promptly after remarks conclude. I would like to recognize that today's discussion may be difficult for some people to revisit, so I want to kindly remind our community to prioritize their mental health and please reach out to someone that you can talk to if you need support in this time of need. You can also call 211 to be referred to a mental health specialist or call 988 if you need someone to talk to immediately. Without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce Maui Fire Chief Ventura.
Aloha and good afternoon. Before we proceed, the Maui Fire Department and the County of Maui again want to express our deepest condolences to everyone affected by this tragic event. We are with you and we thank you for your support as we make every effort to move our community forward together. Mahalo for joining us today so that we can introduce the origin and cause report for the Lahaina fire that occurred on August 8th, 2023. We appreciate your patience while we worked to bring you this report. Before we get into the details of the report, I'd like to thank our team from ATF for bringing their expertise to the island of Maui following the 4 wildfires on August 8th to assist us with this extensive investigation. ATF has dedicated hundreds of staff hours to the collection and review of evidence to provide us the findings and conclusions to supplement MFD's report. Our teams shared our findings, information, data with the exception of electrical data from HECO, which was confidentially provided to ATF pursuant to a non-disclosure and confidentiality agreement. Because MFD was not provided access to this electrical data, it relies on the ATF for interpretation of those data points. The report released today covers only the origin and cause of the Lahaina fire. The report will be available on the Maui Fire Department County website at 1 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time today. Please note that the MFD report and the ATF report appended to it will be redacted to protect the privacy of individual investigators and witnesses and in accordance with the non-disclosure agreement between ATF and Hawaiian Electric. We'll take this opportunity to note that our respect for our personnel's privacy has been conspicuously absent from other reports recently released about these fires. One of our primary purposes today is to provide some background that will help the layperson understand and interpret the released report. First, we want to describe the collaboration between MFD investigators and ATF. As is typical for a local level department like Maui Fire, our investigative team is appropriately staffed and trained to handle our day-to-day investigative needs. Our team consists of uniformed fire officers, originally trained as emergency responders, who now function primarily as inspectors and plan reviewers. They've also undergone additional training consistent with national standards to conduct fire origin and cause investigations. Given the magnitude and consequence of the fires on August 8th, MFD chose to avail itself to additional resources with ATF's National Response Team to assist with the investigation and report. National level resources like ATF exist precisely for these situations. They provide added expertise and experience to supplement local level departments for major incidents. In short, MFD felt that the Lahaina fire was too important to our community and our department to go it alone. So we are very grateful for the tremendous amount of support that ATF has provided through this entire process. They've worked hand in hand with our own investigators throughout and have lent an authoritativeness to the report that it would not otherwise have possessed.
Mahalo, Chief Ventura. Up next, Assistant Fire Chief Giese.
Good afternoon, everybody. We would also like to provide a brief general orientation to the process of fire investigation and the terminology that we use, which we hope will help our community better understand the report. Once we've identified that a given fire calls for an investigation, an investigator or investigative team is assigned. The central focus for fire department investigators is to identify the origin and cause for the fire, and then to provide its overall classification. In common terms, we identify as precisely as we can where and how the fire started, and then determine whether its cause was natural, incendiary, accidental, or undetermined. The process for doing so involves 5 general activities. So we collect data. A substantial portion of investigator training concerns how to identify and properly collect pertinent empirical data. This comes from dispatch information, witness statements, responder statements, photographs, videos, and of course examination of the scene itself for evidence pointing to where or how the fire started. Next, we analyze the data. This involves investigators applying their training and experience to determine the reliability of the data and what it means for the purpose of the investigation. What does the data tell us about where the fire started, what ignition source contacted what fuel, and how the fire traveled thereafter? After data analysis, investigators develop hypotheses to tell the story of where and how the fire started. These are based upon the data analysis in combination with known and plausible fire causes, all informed by the training, experience, expertise, and research of the investigative team. After all reasonable hypotheses for the origin and cause have been developed, we test each hypothesis one by one against the data analysis in light of established scientific principles to see if the hypotheses are valid. This is perhaps the most important point. We don't develop a hypothesis and then try to prove it to be true. That method exposes us to expectation and confirmation biases that cloud the legitimacy of our conclusions. Instead, we develop a full range of plausible hypotheses and then see which ones we can exclude and which ones hold merit. This brings us to the final step of our investigative method, which is establishing our conclusion. If only one hypothesis withstood scrutiny, that final hypothesis serves as our conclusion. If multiple plausible hypotheses fit the data and analysis, then unless one can be demonstrated to be clearly the most probable, we are left with multiple possibilities and no single definitive cause will be established. At this stage of the process, we're ready to provide our general classification of the fire, which involves placing it in one of 4 categories. The cause could be natural, meaning the fire started from some natural phenomenon with no direct human intervention. Sometimes we determine the fire to be incendiary, meaning the fire was intentionally ignited in an area where and when there should not be a fire. It's often the case, of course, that the fire is properly classified as accidental, meaning the established cause does not involve a deliberate human act to ignite or spread the fire where it shouldn't be. Finally, sometimes the proper classification is undetermined, meaning the fire has not yet been sufficiently proven to place it in another category. Now we'll bring Chief Ventura back up.
Hopefully this orientation proves helpful when you read the report. We also, of course, will take this opportunity to provide a high-level summary of the report's principal conclusions. They are as follows. The destruction of much of Lahaina on August 8th, 2023 was caused by a single fire that started at 6:34 in the morning. The fire was caused by re-energization of broken utility lines, resulting in sparks igniting unmaintained vegetation at and surrounding utility pole 25 off of Lahaina Luna Road. This hypothesis was overwhelmingly supported by the data, and all initially plausible alternatives were considered and excluded. While it was initially plausible that there were in fact 2 fires, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, while investigation left this possibility open, hypotheses were considered, and clear conclusion by investigators of both MFD and ATF were that this in fact was one fire. This one fire proceeded in 2 identifiable phases. The morning phase continued until fire crews left scene at approximately 2:18 in the afternoon. Throughout the nearly 8 hours MFD was on scene during the morning phase, a significant number of resources were deployed to this fire, even as MFD attended to multiple other emergencies, including lines and poles down all over Lahaina town. At that time, all available indications showed that the fire had been fully contained and extinguished. However, at approximately 2:52 in the afternoon, what's known as a rekindle event took place in the gully adjacent to the existing burn area. A piece of smoldering material hidden in the unmanaged vegetation in the adjacent gully was fueled and reignited by a severe wind event, and the fire resumed with disastrous consequences. Multiple hypotheses for this rekindle event remain open, with no definitive conclusion reached for exactly how the ignition source found susceptible fuel. Most likely it was a firebrand or smoldering material moved by the wind. This could have happened at any time during the morning phase of the fire, and the brand could have been hidden anywhere in the general area before being transported into the gully. We could not rule out the possibility that smoldering material was displaced by heavy equipment, cutting fire breaks to contain the morning phase of the fire. We also could not exclude the possibility that the smoldering item was a root or a piece of other fuel lying under the surface of the dirt and ash that was eventually uncovered and flared up in severe winds that ignited fuel in the gully. In sum, the origin and cause of the Lahaina fire is clear. The re-energization of broken power lines caused sparks that ignited unmaintained vegetation in the area. Exactly how this fire rekindled in the afternoon is considered undetermined, with multiple plausible hypotheses fitting the known data.
Mahalo, Chief Ventura. Up next, ATF Special Agent in Charge, Blaze.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chief Ventura. My name is Jonathan Blaze. I'm the Special Agent in Charge of ATF's Seattle Field Division, which covers the state of Hawaii. On behalf of ATF, I want to extend our deepest condolences to the families and loved ones affected by last year's horrific tragedy. We know and understand that today's announcement will undoubtedly refresh difficult memories. Like all of you, we are extremely grateful to the firefighters and first responders for the courage they showed in battling these fires and protecting the community. I cannot emphasize enough that the brave men and women who fought the fire did so facing extreme weather conditions and wildfire of historic proportions. We are grateful for their dedication and service. As the Chief just said, today Maui Fire Department will publicly release their origin and cause report. Attached to it will be ATF's summary of findings, which outlines the results of our agency's independent fire investigation. ATF's report was produced at the request of Maui Fire Department and is based on ATF's expert analysis of the fire scenes, interviews, and a review of evidence. ATF carries out many missions across the United States, one of the most critical being our expertise in fire investigation. Last year, in the aftermath of the devastating fire, Maui Fire Department requested the assistance of ATF's fire investigators, laboratory personnel, and ATF is a federal agency primarily responsible for administering and enforcing the criminal and regulatory provisions of the federal firearm laws pertaining to destructive devices, also known as bombs, explosives, and arson. For approximately 40 years, ATF has developed scientifically proven investigative capabilities, expertise, and resources that has positioned ATF as the nation's primary source for the explosives and fire investigative knowledge and assistance. At the heart of our fire and arson program is making our expertise, experience, and resources available to any fire department or law enforcement agency in the country that asks for our help. That is why we did this in this situation at Maui's request. ATF investigators traveled to Maui in the aftermath of the fire, in fact, visited fire scenes on numerous occasions over the following months. They conducted dozens of interviews and corroborated with several partner agencies and private organizations to gather critical information. Based on our comprehensive investigation, as detailed in today's released summary and findings report, ATF classified the fire as accidental. More specifically, the fire that began in the early morning hours was caused by the ignition of dried vegetation resulting from the contact with molten materials that originated when utility equipment failed. Because of an undetected smoldering event or rekindling, the fire reignited in the afternoon, causing extreme devastation, including the loss of life, property, and more. I recognize that the community has been eager for information and answers, and I understand that the frustration with the time it took to complete this analysis. I want to emphasize, however, the ATF's priority has always been to ensure a thorough and accurate investigation. Fire investigation is a complex and time-consuming task. ATF Maui Fire Department investigators were determined to complete a comprehensive and exhaustive accounting of these fires because this community deserves answers. ATF and Maui Fire Department have been committed to providing this community with accuracy, transparency. Each element in this investigation and report have been scrutinized and peer-reviewed by veteran certified fire investigators. We understand that no report or investigative finding can restore what was lost in this terrible tragedy. But we hope that the facts presented today provide answers and bring at least some semblance of closure to those most affected. Thank you.
At this point, we want to make abundantly clear to Lahaina and to our Maui community that our firefighters went above and beyond their due diligence to be as confident as they could be that the fire was completely extinguished before they left the scene. They remained on scene for over 5.5 hours after the fire was completely contained, and for several hours after any visible signs of fire were detected. No flames, no smoke, no perceptibly glowing pieces of fuel had been observed for hours before they left. This is more than twice our average post-containment on-scene time for similarly sized fires over the last several years. Our firefighters spent extensive on-scene time despite the fact that they were being subjected to near hurricane-force winds and the constant danger of falling utility lines and poles. Additionally, there were 10 other 911 calls for service in the Lahaina district during the time our crews worked this phase of the fire, including down lines and utility poles throughout Lahaina town. The number of resources devoted to this morning phase of the fire was well above average for similarly sized fires, and this despite the fact that arguably the worst fire in state history was already raging upcountry at Olinda and Kula. While on scene, MFD personnel poured many thousands of gallons of water, enhanced with Class A foam, onto the entire visible burn area. In addition to the direct efforts to soak the entire area with water and foam, multiple dozer lines were placed along the fire perimeter, and of course there was the bypass road to serve as another fire break. These gave additional assurance that the fire was secure. Given all of the above, and given everything going on up country, and with so much potential for fires and other emergency calls in their own and neighboring districts, and with all perceptible indicators showing this fire was out, company officers decided it was time to pack up their equipment, head to their nearby station, and ready themselves for the next emergency. Unfortunately, as you'll read in the report, some material retained enough heat to rekindle this fire by igniting the dry vegetation nearby.
Mahalo, Assistant Chief. Now I would like to welcome questions from the media in the spirit of allowing everyone to ask at least one question. We ask your kokua in raising one question, and then I'll spit around again to try to accommodate a second question. I'm going to start with Maui-based media today. Chelsea?
Yes, this question is for Chief Ventura. Reignition sort of places blame on your firefighters. What do you feel about that, and what are your thoughts?
To reiterate the question was the base of the fire was reignition. Does that place blame on your firefighter? Could you please give us your thoughts?
Thanks for the question. You know, in the fire service, we all know rekindle as something that none of us want to deal with or hear. But as we've explained, we are confident in the efforts of our firefighters that day, in the conditions that they faced, even in the conditions that they faced, that they went above what they should have gone above and beyond on normal days to protect the community as best as they can. And at the end of the day, a fire captain or an officer has all of his senses to make a determination when to leave the scene, and he determined that the fire to be as safe as possible for the community. And we stand behind them on their decision. It is hard, and we'll be working with them, but we'll be standing by them with this side. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. Next question, Wendy?
This is for Special Agent Blaze. You had mentioned that part of the accidental determination was electrical equipment that failed as part of it. Can you go into a little bit more detail about that?
The question is, in regards to electrical equipment that failed, could Special Agent Blaze please go into a little more detail about that?
Thank you. The detail that I can provide on that is the electrical equipment that failed was a result of malfunctioning power lines that dropped to the ground and re-energized, or in essence, lit the vegetation on fire. So that is the basis of what you're asking.
Thank you, Agent Blaze. Gina?
Related to that somewhat, sir, then, because whether due to the re-energized power line or in the unmaintained brush, did you find any aspect of this investigation that could lead to charges of misconduct, negligence, inattention, some of the other kinds of indictment-related things we've seen in fires elsewhere where there might not be intention, but a level of negligence that is criminal?
To reiterate the question in regards to reignition and the down-powered lines, is there anything that you think could lead to further charges legally?
Thank you. As I stated, the determination was the fire was accidental. However, ATS policies, we do not comment on any proposed criminal activity or violations that have occurred.
Would you comment if you could rule them out at this point, just so the public can know whether or not there's a possibility that someone may be held legally liable?
I can't comment on that right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Paula?
Yes, this is for anybody, either the chief or the ATF gentleman. But in terms of the rekindling in the afternoon, could they just spell it out a little bit more clearly, like what exactly happened to restart the fire?
The question is, in regard to the reignition later in the afternoon, could you please walk us through the exact steps of what happened to reignite the fire again? Chief, you want to handle it?
I'll go ahead and address that question. The truth is the specifics remain undetermined. What we're confident in concluding is that some piece of material that was set afire during the morning phase found its way into that gully where the photographic video evidence and witness reports show that the rekindle occurred. As you'll see in the report, there are multiple plausible hypotheses that withstood the scrutiny of our analysis to explain it. Sometimes pieces of burning material get blown by the wind, and they can land in multiple places before finally hitting some piece of susceptible fuel that kicks off the next phase of a fire. It's possible, as was mentioned, that the piece of smoldering fuel was under the dirt and ash and just unable to be seen until the wind events, which accelerated greatly between the morning and afternoon phases, blew whatever was covering it off, fed it fresh oxygen, and gave it the energy it needed to kick off another fire. It's possible that that heavy equipment, in its act of creating the fire break to help secure the fire, pushed some smoldering material into that gully area. We don't know that that happened. We don't have any direct evidence that that happened, but it remains open as a possibility in our report because we couldn't definitively rule it out. So we're in a situation where we can't specify precisely the mechanism for that second phase of the fire. We've identified some plausible hypotheses that make sense given what we know about how fires behave, and that's the best we're going to be left with at this point.
Mahalo, Chief.
Even though the fire was accidental, is there any possibility that someone could be at fault for this? Like any agency, group?
The question is, even though perceivably the fire is accidental, is there anyone that could be directly responsible for the fire?
So all our indicators don't push us in that direction. Our indicators are that it was an accident, and that's why it's determined as accidental. And again, for our department's perspective and responsibility, it's sometimes different from police or ATF, but we don't have any indicators or research done on the fact that it would have been something negligent or anything of that nature.
Thank you, Chief. Chivo.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for this report. With all of the back and forth that was in the press about where the report was, and it was with the ATF, it was with the fire department, no, it's with ATF. Can we get to the real reason why the report took as long as it did?
The question is, can you please comment on why the report was delayed in releasing it to the public?
Speaking on behalf of ATF, I realize that the report seemed like it took an extensive amount of time to complete and publish. However, again, I state these investigations are very complex. They take a lot of time. There's a lot of data for the investigators to analyze, videos to review, interviews to go over, re-interviews. There was multiple site visits by the investigators, and all that takes time to put together. And we wanted to make sure that we did a complete and thorough investigation. We put together a complete and accurate report of the events. And for that, just as things that go through as well, you know, they go through a review process, peer review, additionally editing, and we want to have a complete and accurate report, and that's owed to the citizens of Maui. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Special Agent. Colleen.
Can you talk about the multiple hypotheses, the top hypotheses that were considered, and how you tested them and ruled them out?
The question is, can you please go over the multiple hypotheses that rose to the top in this investigation, and can you comment on them, please?
Sure, I can address your question. Of course, there'll be much more detail than I can recall at this time in the reports. I'll focus my answer on the origin and cause of the fire. This was early morning. So alternative hypotheses would include things like lightning. Nationwide, lightning starts a large percentage of wildfires. So we look at data from meteorological data to verify there was no lightning. We interview witnesses. Did anybody see or hear any lightning? Right? So we were able to rule out lightning because we're quite confident there was not. Right? We can look at smoking materials, for example. We have witness reports that show nobody in the area, for example. We can look for fireworks. Fireworks is a common cause for brush fires. So again, not only were there no reports of people seeing fireworks, no reports of people hearing fireworks, there was also no physical evidence recovered on scene of fireworks that was consistent with those being the cause for the fire. In the greater area, there was residue of fireworks discovered, but through analysis of the data, it was determined conclusively that those pieces of firework remnants could not possibly have been the cause of the fire. Those are some of the hypotheses. There may be others. Again, there's much more detail in the report. It's extensive. But all of the common, plausible, likely causes for wildfires are considered and then compared against the data that we have to determine if they remain plausible. And for the cause and origin of this fire, all of the witness statements, the video and photographic evidence, and the on-scene evidence points very conclusively to the cause and origin identified in the report that will be published shortly.
Thank you, Chief. Catherine?
Can you talk about the decision why the county was the one to release the report and not the ATF directly? And along with that, address any concerns about transparency from the public about that process?
The question is, can you explain why the ATF didn't release the report directly and why it's released through the Maui Fire Department? And also, can you talk about the transparency of that?
Good question. So it's our responsibility per charter to investigate all fires. So that lays with us. We can request the assistance of any other agencies to help us, and we did that utilizing the ATF. As far as the transparency goes, had we not been transparent here, Rekindle probably would not have shown up in the report. That's it.
Thank you, Chief. We'll do another round. Gina?
Can I ask what the lessons learned are? What are the conclusions? What from this can keep our communities here in Hawaii more safe from future wildland-urban interface, and what around the country could keep it more safe from what you've learned here on Maui? If each of both the county and federal could answer that.
Great. To reiterate the question, Gina's question was, what were the lessons that were learned, and what can we pull from this as far as fire prevention is concerned moving forward, not only for Hawaii, but for the United States?
I can start and then we can from your perspective. From the county's perspective, it's all about us continuing to educate the community on how to be safe. We've pushed the message of the FireWise program and how to harden your home and prevent ember ignition for years and years. And we now have some momentum, and people are actually taking action on these things. The Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization is a great resource that we've been working with in a partnership for over 10 years. And we've produced a good Ready, Set, Go guide, which is how you prepare your home, how you get ready to evacuate, and then how you actually do the evacuation. Those are things that are going to keep our community safe. When it comes to wildfire, and especially wind-driven, weather-driven fires, the fire department's not going to be able to stop the fire. So it's really what we can do to make our homes safer, harden our communities. And if you can start at home by yourself, and then your community can grow around you and become more fire-wise, then that whole community can become fire safe. And then those communities may be spared in the event of a wildfire. So from our perspective, that's really the message that we've been pushing before the fire and more so after the fire. At every community meeting we can go to, you'll see a few things in a variety of the reports that have already come out as to recommendations, what we can do to make our community safer, how our planning for development needs to be a little bit fire smarter, how our roadways need to be built to handle the number of cars and the people that are on them. Those are all in the reports that have come out throughout the last year. But from a local perspective, prevention is the first thing, and then when it starts, how do we protect ourselves at home?
Thank you, Chief. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, go ahead.
I just want to add the ATF's role in this investigation was what caused the fire. We did not look at other avenues or what could have prevented the fire. However, ATF does conduct nationwide trainings with fire departments and other related entities on fire science and things of that nature. So we do participate in that as well, but the focus of this and this report was what caused the fire, not what could have prevented the fire.
Nationally speaking, though, is this a significant enough event and significant enough findings that you'll be carrying this forward into your nationwide trainings?
I can say that this will be looked at. I don't know at what levels and how it will be presented, but I'm 100% certain that, any event of this magnitude is studied and reviewed and presented at different levels as the years go on.
Thank you. Paula.
Yeah, I have a two-part question, just responding to what the fire chief just said about, what have you learned from this? And it sounded like you were saying that a lot of this is on the public to do things to harden their home or be safe. But in this case, if I understand the origin of the fire, it was a downed power line. So if downed power lines are what initially caused this fire, I guess, like, why are you saying that the big thing is for the public to be safe and be fire-wise? Like, it seems like there's a disconnect there.
The question is, considering that the education that's being done is asking the public to take ownership of fire mitigation, can you comment on the fact that the cause of this fire was a downed power line, and how would the public perceivably prepare for an event of that type?
A good question, because what we're looking at here today is origin and cause, and then we're talking about what happens when the fire starts. So the question, if you're talking about the origin and cause of a fire, then we need to tell people to stop parking on sides of roads. We need to underground utilities. We need to do all sorts of things that are the cause of wildfires. And those are things that have been determined in many reports across the nation as far as what causes wildfires. Camping and having for your campfire, those are big problems in the mainland. We haven't had that in our neck of the woods here, but those are all things that we all know could improve. And we've been a proponent for undergrounding utilities for years, but it's expensive. And then that cost will be passed on to the homeowners. So there's a balance that has to be met. And from a department's perspective, we're always going to focus on what everybody can do to make this fire safer and not just one person. So we'll work with the whole community and see how everybody can advance fire safety forward.
Thank you, Chief. We'll take two more questions. Chivo.
On Monday, Governor Green mentioned that the ATF report said that it was pretty much everybody's fault. And I was wondering, does that equate to that it was nobody's fault? I mean, there was wind, there were underground possible rekindling events and things that just cannot be helped. So how does that shake out?
Respectively, I don't think we're going to comment on Governor Green's perspective, but did anyone want to offer a comment on that?
I would have said the same thing.
Yeah, we can't comment on Governor Green's perspective.
Okay. Then I would just ask,
Sure.
Aren't these rekindling events pretty common here? I mean, you guys have your hands full with that sort of a situation.
The question is, isn't reignition quite common? And that obviously would lead to the fire department having their hands full. Could you comment on that situation?
Yeah. So during the peak wildfire season here in Maui is the summer months, and we respond to about 60 wildfires a month. And that's when we kind of peak in July and August. And I would say, based on that, rekindling is not a big issue for us. It is, when it happens, it's something that nobody likes and is frowned upon, but it's not something that happens at all 60 of our fires. It's something that occurs occasionally due to topography, terrain, resources, wind, the relative humidity, all the factors that come into play when a fire is started. So on most of our fires, there's definitely not rekindle issues. Thank you.
Chelsea.
Question for ATF. Do you agree with the decision to the firefighters to leave the fire scene?
The question is to ATF, do you agree with the Maui Fire Department's decision to leave the scene?
Thank you. I believe that Maui Fire Department did everything possible to extinguish the morning phase of that fire. They deployed countless resources, spent an extensive amount of time on scene, and observed the scene after they believed it was extinguished. So yes, I do believe they did everything possible.
We'll take one last question. Catherine?
Chief, you mentioned the non-disclosure agreement with Hawaiian Electric and the redacted information in the complete report. Can you talk a little bit more about that, what information that was, and is that something that's typical for these types of reports?
The question is, can you comment on the redacted information and the purpose of redacting information in the report?
Yeah, so the utility equipment that's released is protected. And so it was given to ATF with a non-disclosure agreement so that they could look at every bit of data and information related to the utility. And because that was trusted and agreed upon in an NDA, we were excluded from receiving all of that information. ATF may be able to add something to what is excluded in the redacted version.
Further, what was redacted and the reference to the NDA, most of that was proprietary information related to HECO and critical infrastructure information, which would be devastating if it was released publicly and could be used for nefarious purposes. So that's the reason for the NDA and the redaction of that information.
And is that pretty typical for this type of report being released?
In dealing with something that relates to critical infrastructure and public safety, yes.
Okay, I'm going to take one last question. Gina?
We've given a lot of attention to electric, which is important, but a big part of your finding is the unmaintained brush. What will the fire department do with our large landowners with their unmaintained brush to hold them accountable, to get them into compliance, and do any laws need to be changed to help you enforce that?
The question is, as far as unmaintained vegetation, what will the fire department be doing to address that issue moving forward, and what can the public do as well?
Great question. As we write the amendments for our fire code right now and prepare for what's next, the fire department can enforce the fire code. Currently, the fire code states that vegetation 30 feet from a structure needs to be maintained to 18 inches. So when you look up at these hills of unmaintained, unmanaged, overgrown, whatever you want to describe it as, it's something that we're working with the landowners on right now to be better stewards of their land. We, Maui Fire Department, have created about 2 years ago a WUI plan. It's on our website. You can look that up. And that's how we work with neighborhoods to go and identify the risks around their neighborhood and to work with the landowner that surrounds their neighborhood to work on fuel mitigation. Moving forward, we plan to identify through high-risk maps where we want large landowners to cut fuel breaks annually. Our plan is to send out our inspectors pre-fire season and notify landowners if the vegetation needs to be managed, and if so, notify them. When we give a notice of warning and followed by a notice of violation, we give direct orders on what to do to the land and to maintain it. Therefore, we shouldn't have to go back to babysit lots over and over again. It is something that is clearly written in our notice of violation, and if a complaint is made by the community and we do identify a fire code violation, we will give a notice of warning. If it's not addressed in 30 days, we'll give a notice of violation. If it's not addressed, we do have means to take action up after that. But when we look across the landscape at what people are thinking is what we should be cutting, we really have to make sure our fire code is manageable. We have to make sure we don't put unrealistic expectations on people. There's a lot of different tools to do vegetation management, and we're happy to educate these landowners on this topic. And our Fire Prevention Bureau has had several large landowner meetings to help them work their land. In particular, we have meetings this week and this afternoon with large landowners to continue this conversation. We've been to conferences over the years discussing wildfires, and historically, sometimes absent were the landowners. It was more of a fire conference. That is changing. They are there. They are interested in making our community safer. So we mahalo them for that.
Mahalo nui. This formally concludes our press conference. Thank you.